Mogadishu, Somalia. Operation Gothic Serpent. The year is 1993. Elite members of the United States Army were deployed as part of Task Force Ranger on October 3rd, 1993. Tasked with the apprehension of advisors to a Somali warlord, Mohammed Farah Aid, turned into a rescue mission due to the Black Hawk helicopters being shot down over during the operation. An elite operator, Delta Force sniper, Sergeant First Class, and Medal of Honor recipient, a man whose acts of valor cost him his life, Randall Shughart. Randall David Shughart was born on August 13th, 1958. His father, Herbert Shughart, was an Air Force veteran, and they had actually moved to Pennsylvania State after his father had discharged from the military and worked on a dairy operation. After graduating high school in 1976, Shughart had joined the United States Army, where he had attended basic training at Fort Benning in Georgia. After basic training, he would remain in Benning and attend advanced infantry school, conducting one-station unit training, where he would also remain to go to airborne school, jump school, and earn his wings. Once he had completed airborne school in 1978, Shughart was given orders to report to the 2nd Ranger Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment at Fort Lewis, where he would go through Ranger Indoctrination Program. Shughart had to go through the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program, or RASP. Basically, it's meeting the physical and mental requirements, passing your ASAP with a high score, qualify for security clearance, as well as have an MOS needed for the regiment. 75th Ranger Regiment candidates will display their skills in navigation, combat water survival assessments, physical assessments, field craft, and weapon proficiency, which will award them their 75th Ranger Battalion Scroll. Soldiers in the Ranger Battalion are also granted a slot for the Ranger School, which is where you get your Ranger tab. Ranger School is a 62-day small unit tactics and leadership course for developing functional skills related to units whose missions are to engage enemy in close combat and direct fire battles. Shughart passed with ease. In 1980, he decided to go to the reserve unit for a few years. However, in 1983, he came back to active duty, went through the Special Forces Q course, and became a Green Beret. Wouldn't be long until 1984, he'd be given orders and be off to Delta Force, the top tier #1 Special Force operations for the United States Army. Delta Force order directly from the President and Secretary of Defense. Deal mostly with counterterrorism, hostage rescue, espionage, special ops reconnaissance. The attrition rate for Delta Force, out of 120 soldiers that apply, only 14 to 16 pass on average. Shughart would also attend the Army Sniper School program. And as he left Sniper School, he became the rank of Sergeant First Class. A civil war between rivaling factions in Somalia had erupted in 1988 to 1990. The Somali armed forces began engaging in combat against various rebel armed groups in the United Somali Congress in the south. The clan-based arms opposition group overthrew the Bar government in 1991. These warring factions continued to fight all the way up until 1992, and Somalia had become a failed state and collapsed. The UN in 1993 began a peacekeeping coalition, started this 2-year battle United Nations operation in Somalia, primarily in the south. The original mandate was used, all necessary means to guarantee the delivery of humanitarian aid in accordance to Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter, whereas the aim of UNISOM 1 was primarily humanitarian. UNITAF's mission statement to restore peace, stability, law, and order, and suggest their belief in Somalia's incapacity to secure their own safety of the population without assistance from an international military. The United States was conducted in Mogadishu, Somalia, by the United States. The codename task force was Ranger during the Civil War in 1993. The primary objective of the operation was to capture Mohammed Farah Aid, leader of the Somali National Alliance, who was wanted by the UNISOM in response to his attacks against United Nations troops. In August of 1993, the United States would begin deploying Special Operations Unit, 75th Ranger Regiment, Navy SEAL Team, as well as Delta Force, into the bloodiest battle since Vietnam. Shughart would lead his team, as currently climbed the ranks again as the Assistant Team Lead Sergeant, Task Force Ranger, for Operation Gothic Serpent. At 1:50, Task Force Ranger Analysis received intelligence of Omar Salad's location, and command was given to begin the Operation Capture Kill. Code Irene was ran across the radio channel, signaling soldiers, vehicle convoys, and helicopters signed at the Mogadishu International Airport to move out. Led by the MH-6 Little Bird, 16 helicopters took off from the airport to make it the approximately 4-minute flight to the target. In an attempt to deceive Somali forces, the formation flew past the target before returning around en masse. American aircrew noticed soon after takeoff the Somalis had started to light burning fires around the city to signal the militias to gather and block the street corners to counterattacks. At 3:42, the Little Birds carrying the Delta operators, including Shughart, reached the target. Dust surrounding the area was so bad that one helicopter was forced to land out of position. And almost immediately after the first landing, a pilot began noticing small arms fire. The two Black Hawks carrying the 2nd Delta Assault Team, led by Captain Austin S. Miller, came into position and dropped their teams as the 4 Ranger Chalks prepared to rope down into the 4 corners surrounding the target's building. Chalk 4, carried by Black Hawk Super 67, piloted by CW3 Jeff Nicklaus and CW2 Sam Champ, was accidentally put a block north of the intended point. Within 10 minutes, the roads surrounding the Olympic Hotel were covered with militia and nearly sealed off. Somali platoons arriving from the south Mogadishu splintered into half-dozen squads of about 16 or 7 men, depending. Task Force Rangers ground control convoy started to move into the spot. Within 40 minutes of the raid, the assault began. One of the Black Hawks, the Super 61, piloted by CW3 Cliff Elvis Wolcock, was struck by an RPG-7 and sent the helicopter into an uncontrollable spin, crashing into a residential area. Both pilots were killed in the crash, and 2 of the crew, Sergeant Ray Dowdy and Charlie Warren, were severely wounded. 2 Delta snipers, Staff Sergeant Daniel Bush and Sergeant Jim Smith, survived the crash and began defending the crash site. Approximately 4:40, a Black Hawk with the call sign Super 64, piloted by Michael Durant, was orbiting almost directly above the wreckage of number 61. It was spotted by Yusuf Tahir Malem, commander of the 7-man SNA RPG team, slowly moving upwards towards the first crash site. One of the men in his squad knelt down on the road, aimed a Super 64's tail rotor, and fired. The RPG hit the tail, but the helicopter initially seemed to be fine. A few moments later, the rotor assembly disintegrated and the helicopter began to lurch forward and spin violently. It dropped 100 feet, narrowly avoiding a large building in the area, but slamming into a group of tin shacks in the upright position. A small Ranger relief column was dispatched from the airfield, only to lose 2 more Humvees and 3 soldiers within 1 kilometer of the base. The Somalians had anticipated the United States reaction and positioned militia throughout the entire city. At the second crash site, 2 Delta snipers, Master Sergeant Gary Gordon and Sergeant First Class Randy Shughart, were inserted by Black Hawk Super 62. Their first 2 requests to be inserted were denied, but a 3rd request was finally approved after the quick response troops were ambushed. After 10 minutes of the Super 62 giving fire support to the Delta snipers, an RPG slammed into the cockpit, ripping straight through the engine and knocking the co-pilot unconscious. Despite the damage of the Super 62, he piloted it back to the base out of the battle. Lacking fire support, the snipers were overrun and Gordon was fatally wounded. Shughart picked up Gordon's Car-15 and gave it to Durant. Shughart went back around the helicopter nose and held off the crowd for about 10 more minutes before he was killed after running out of ammunition. Gordon and Shughart had fought all the way to the end non-stop until the very last rounds were ran out. 2 true men, 2 acts of valor. Both killed in action and be known forever. Mike Durant fought as hard as he could as well, however, all they did was capture. Mike Durant would be a POW for 11 days until negotiations freed him from his captors. After their deaths, their bodies were dragged through the city of Mogadishu on display, just the true brutality of the war. The bodies of both Shughart and Gordon were returned upon negotiations. Master Sergeant Gordon was buried in West Broadway, Lincoln, Maine. First Sergeant Shughart was buried in Westminster, Pennsylvania. On May 3rd, 1994, both men received the Congressional Medal of Honor posthumously for their acts of valor in the Mogadishu battle. Citation of Sergeant First Class Shughart, United States Army. Sergeant First Class Shughart, United States Army, distinguished himself by actions above and beyond the call of duty on the 3rd of October, 1993. While serving as a sniper team member, United States Army Special Operations Command with Task Force Ranger in Mogadishu, Somalia, Sergeant First Class Shughart provided precision sniper fire from the lead helicopter during an assault on a building and 2 helicopter crash sites, while subject to intense automatic weapon fire and numerous rocket-propelled grenades while providing critical suppressive fire at a second crash site. Sergeant First Class Shughart and his team leader learned that the ground forces were not immediately available to secure the site. Sergeant First Class Shughart and his team leader unhesitatingly volunteered to be inserted to protect the 4 critically wounded personnel, despite being well aware of the growing numbers of the enemy personnel closing in on the elite. After their 3rd request to be inserted, Sergeant First Class Shughart and his team leader received permission to perform this volunteer mission. When debris and enemy ground fires at the site caused them to abort the first attempt, Sergeant First Class Shughart and his team leader were inserted 100 meters south of the crash site, equipped with only his sniper rifle, a pistol. Sergeant First Class Shughart and his team leader, while under intense fire from the enemy, fought their way through a dense maze of shanties and shacks. To reach the critically injured crew members, Sergeant First Class Shughart pulled the pilot and the other crew members from the aircraft, establishing a perimeter which placed him and his fellow sniper in the most vulnerable position. Sergeant First Class Shughart used his long-range rifle and sidearm to kill an undetermined number of attackers while traveling the perimeter, protecting the downed crew. Sergeant First Class Shughart continued his protective fire until he depleted his ammunition and was fatally wounded. His actions had saved Mike Durant's, the pilot's, life. Sergeant First Class Shughart's extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty were in keeping with the highest standards of military service and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army. One thing I always found really interesting about Sergeant First Class Randall Shughart was the fact that he chose to use the M14 battle rifle. I mean, the United States Army had commissioned the M14 in 1958 and the Marine Corps in 1965. However, its use was limited and was phased out. The M16, took its spot. Its length, its weight was incredibly heavy. Had a higher recoil because of the 7.62-51 round that it shot. A well-trained marksman, Randall Shughart, one of the best snipers on Delta Force. It was lethal. And in 1993, during the Operation Gothic Serpent, Sergeant First Class Randall Shughart would commit ultimate acts of valor and give his life using this rifle. In 1994, Gary Gordon and Randall Shughart were awarded the first Congressional Medal of Honors since the Vietnam War. Chief Warrant Officer Michael Durant, the helicopter pilot whose life they saved, said one thing about Shughart is that after Gordon had already been killed in action, Shughart had came over in a calm demeanor, like nothing was wrong, even though he knew his death was going to take place. And that's true valor in a soldier who fought till the end, till he ran out of ammunition. There have been multiple movies and books describing the events of Mogadishu, as well as memorials, bridges, naval ships, and schools named after Shughart and Gordon. Make their lives eternal through memory. Valor.